Well, welcome everyone. I am PJ Calzadilla-Ortiz, pronouns she, they. I am part of Insure Equality's team. And I'm so excited to be here today with these lovely panelists where we're going to have a conversation, an important and needed conversation about inclusive behaviors, diversity, equity, and belonging in the insurance world and beyond. So to kick it off, I wanted all the panelists to have an opportunity to really introduce themselves, share their area of interest and expertise, and the icebreaker question being, what does inclusivity and a sense of belonging mean to you? To kick it off.
Should I go first?
Go for it.
First, here we go. So, hi everyone. Morning. My name is Raghu Sundara, and I own an Allstate agency here in the Chicagoland area. I've been in insurance for about 15 years, 12 in the corporate world as in management, and last 4 have been for my own Allstate agency here in the community I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago. And what does belonging, and I also own a business coach that focuses on helping people with their networking efforts. So belonging when it comes to networking and things like that, and strategies to grow their network exponentially when it comes to ground networking game. So I've been doing that for about a year. And as far as what is inclusivity and a sense of belonging mean to me, I would say feeling like I'm being welcomed. When I'm in these chambers of commerce, what does an ambassador do? Being an ambassador for people, leading them, breaking the cliques, introducing, opening doors for people, making sure that, like being a giver, a giving mindset. I think that first, like volunteering. So the sense of belonging when you are at a volunteer event, for example, in a safe space where you can just be yourself in any aspect, any arena that you're in, you can just be yourself and it's safe and people like you for who you are instead of who you know. That's me.
Thank you so much, Raghu. Dr. Michelle Precious.
Hello, I'm Dr. Michelle Morkert. My pronouns are she and her, and I have a PhD in gender studies, and I'm a certified professional coach with a certificate in confidence coaching from the American Confidence Institute. And so I was in academia for over 17 years, and I've been a global gender scholar. So I've studied, human rights issues specifically around gender and all of its, different intersections globally and here in the United States as well. And I kind of went down a rabbit hole, PJ, when you asked us this question, what does belonging mean? And what I kind of came to is that for me, belonging is an invitation to lovingly disrupt. And so it's got to start with me, right? So when do I feel like I belong? When do I feel like I'm not? What's my mindset about belonging? Who do I think belongs and who do I think doesn't belong, right? In my life, in the workplace, in my communities, and all those kinds of things. And so I think it's a loving invitation for disruption, though, right? I think that's pretty key. But I think disruption is a huge part of it. And that's something we're going to talk quite a bit about today, I think, too.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm just thrilled to be on such an esteemed panel with so many professionals. I'm Precious Norman-Walton. So I am the co-founder and the president of Lovejoy Risk Management Corporation. We're an independent agency based in the Dallas, Texas area. This morning, I'm joining you by way of San Francisco. I also sit on the Global Leadership Council for the CPCU Society, so I'm a chartered property casualty underwriter. I've been very active with this nonprofit for the past 5-6 years now. I do a lot. I show up in different places, doing a lot of different things. It's whatever I can do to contribute in the most meaningful way. So I teach on behalf of the institutes. I teach on behalf of the Insurance Journal's Academy of insurance, I speak, and mostly when I show up to speak, it's regarding DEI, specifically within the insurance industry. So your question as far as what is inclusion and belonging, the what I think about, what really defines those, especially kind of in the greater acronym, is that it's about embracing and celebrating our differences, not just tolerating them. Because we've all been in situations where you got the invitation, but you kind of looked around the room and realized that there's conversations that are happening that you're not part of, and that while you're in the physical vicinity, that you're not yet, you haven't been pulled into the fold. And so when I think about belonging, I think about being in places with, like-minded folks who really have that appreciation that are, especially our industry, we're like a mosaic. There's all these little tiny pieces and everyone shines, and collectively is what makes the piece beautiful. So, we've got to get beyond the tolerance of differences, and there's a time and place for assimilation, but you really inclusion and belonging are about celebrating and recognizing how all of this diversity of thought, of background, of beliefs makes us better. We're better together. So thanks for having me today.
Absolutely. Thank you all for kicking it off on such a strong note. I think, what I also get from everything that y'all have said, and just like when I hear the word belonging, right, is that we know what belonging can feel like, but we also definitely know what belonging when we don't jarring and how defining that can be to the environments that we're a part of. So that's why I'm particularly passionate about that. And think it's so much more than just this like mushy word. There's a lot to it. So really to kind of start level setting the conversation, right, and really setting the groundwork for what we're going to be talking about today. I have another question for all of you, and it's really from these individual perspectives that you've already kind of started sharing. Why are efforts in diversity, inclusion, and belonging important? Right? Why are we having this conversation? And do you have any examples of their potential impact that it has to have conversations and efforts around this?
I'll let one of you two go first.
Yeah, Precious, do you want to get started because you're in the insurance industry? So I feel like I would love for somebody to speak with that lens first, if you're okay with that.
Thank you. Of course, of course. Yeah, I think that really as we continue to kind of evolve through what these last couple of years has looked like. So full disclosure, I work in the insurance industry primarily, but I also am very active in matters of human resource. So I'm part of the Society of Human Resource Management as a certified professional. And so as we've watched the trends from the Great Resignation, which I think a lot of folks are familiar with, then we kind of moved into this period that a lot of us in the industry have called the Great Regret, because what a lot of employees had discovered was that the grass isn't always greener. They may have left organizations because there was better compensation across the street, but what they realized inadvertently is that they may have sacrificed things, the intangibles like tenure, seniority, comfort, familiarity, or they may have also underestimated the culture piece of it, something that they probably took for granted where they were, but then once they joined a new organization, they were dissatisfied. So we kind of talked about the Great Regret. And then even on the employer side, when there was a real vacuum of talent, especially in insurance, and there was kind of a bidding war, right? It was supply and demand. And so a lot of employers, increased the premium of, 15, 20, 30% sometimes just to fill vacancies, and who they filled them with aren't living up to that increased, price tag. And so we've moved beyond that now. What we're starting to see is that as the economy has reacted because it dipped and it rebounds, and we all know that's very cyclical, there was really this awakening when it came to the workforce. People really had to face off with their mortality and realize that with this pandemic, you can go from the peak of health to the ICU in a couple of days. It made people really appreciate that work-life balance. Being remote, on one hand, many of us were just thankful to continue to be able to make an income, but it also blurred lines. All of a sudden, your bedroom became your boardroom, you were just a couple steps down the hall. And while we didn't have a commute, it became very difficult because there was almost a guilt factor where people were like, well, the least I can do is log back in and do that. I would have been on the road anyway. And so I say all of that because now that we're in this stage where the pendulum has swung, the power forces have, it is definitely a candidates market, especially within the insurance industry, because what we've also saw is what we knew was coming, and it was an acceleration of the retirements in our industry. So a lot of our knowledge was quickly leaving because for them, it was really a trifecta. Their retirement accounts boomed when when that was happening. Their real estate values boomed, so they had equity. And then a lot of them weren't positioned where they were comfortable leading remote teams. It's not something they had to do in their career. And so now that we're more mindful, the onus is now on employers to, how do we really set ourselves apart as being an employer of choice? What does that mean? It's got to be more than take-home pay. It's got to be, now that employees are demanding meaningful work, companies that have the right messaging and branding that stand for something. People want to do work with impact. And so this belonging piece really now more than ever is critical, because the culture that we had before the pandemic, it's over. It has died. There's no putting that genie back in the bottle. It's past us now. And so understanding, how do we not just go through these performative actions, but truly do things that move the needle, so that the ones that are looking for these things, these indices, when they're deciding between multiple offers, what does that look like? How can someone show up on day one and really see themselves plugging in, contributing meaningfully, and helping the organization grow? So it's a beautiful time in this marketplace, especially for those of us who've been DEI practitioners even before the pandemic. But yeah, that's really kind of what we're starting to see, the emphasis on why this has become a priority.
Yeah, thanks, Precious, for starting us with this, because now I have so many thoughts that you really launched for me. And one of the thoughts, though, that's really coming to me is about not having to always make the business case for DEI&B, right? And so like you're talking about, I'm thinking about structurally, right? So if I come into a new place, I want to know that it's more than just the business case for it. And so how are we having those kinds of conversations? Because like you said, right now, there's a lot of DEI momentum. Companies want it, but what do they really want? Are they ready to engage, right, with some of these questions of belonging and the disruption that has to happen systemically as well? So that's something that's really coming up for me that I'm thinking quite a bit about.
I'll jump in here. And also, you just spurred a question for me, like, why do they want it? Why do they want to? Do they want it for the right reason, or do they want it for show? There's a lot of companies that want it for show, and then it gets me to my point of, what's the point if you don't follow up? Without follow-up, you might as well not even do the first action or even the discovery session of what you're trying to do. But when you get to, as far as why is it so important, I think so. A lot of companies, the companies that succeed and the organizations that succeed and have no problem attracting talent and retaining talent, they really give their, especially in insurance, they give their employees and their teams a voice. And so when somebody doesn't have a voice from the beginning, and it starts with the interview process, if they talk about DEI and just inclusion during the interview process, how you start is how you're going to continue. It shouldn't be just a campaign, like a one-time of a year campaign. It should be ongoing. So that's the reason why, is because, people will feel like they belong, obviously, and they're more likely to refer other people that are like-minded to that organization to work there. And they're probably, especially if they're in sales and insurance, I've seen so many people in corporate America insurance, they're not proud of the company they work for, that they won't even refer the company that they work for. And if they don't they don't refer the company they work for, how long are they going to stay? Right? They're just probably looking for another job. And I think those are the things that a specific example too is I've been in 2 different insurance companies, and centralization of service work, of service departments was so now that, and I didn't even realize this until right now that I'm thinking, they didn't think about women, because most service people in the organization I was in were women. It was probably 80% women. They assumed that they didn't want to go into sales, so they gave them severance. They didn't even have that conversation. They knew what they were doing a year before it happened. They didn't even try to cross-train them or ask them, what skills do you want to work on? Would you ever be interested in a sales department or a sales career or underwriting or anything like that? They just assumed that all they care about is service. And so they felt good about themselves because they just give them the severance and then they're on their way. I think that's a specific example of, in my instances, I'm not going to name the companies, but I'm sure it happened a lot. I saw it happen in a lot of companies. It's just, I didn't realize until now that it affected, in my organizations, women specifically. And it's just sad.
Yeah, a lot of it comes up for me where it's like that, holding that mirror up, but also having the accountability to follow through on the action plan after you hold that mirror up, right? Like you have to have that dedication and that genuine care for the progress that you want to make. And it's so much bigger than a side initiative. It's so much bigger than a D&I team. It's so much bigger than it, like, so much leadership has to be, bought into that same mission. Raghu, I don't want to let you go just yet, because you kind of started going into the next question that I have specifically for you, right? You mentioned this, DEI&B requires continuous efforts and should often include and amplify as many voices as possible. So what are some ways to include as many people in your organization in these DEI&B efforts, and what kind of resources and tools have you seen folks need?
I think the tools and resources, I'll start with that, is I think something that tools and resources that actually use, that they are using for other things within that organization for their current job. If they're somebody who loves, they're more like Google Calendar versus paper calendar, work with them on that. If they're more techie, use that aspect and use the same types of things that they're already doing, and just incorporate the DEI mindset in there and those types of initiatives, because they're more likely to continue it on, versus if it's something that is not in their normal routine of the day, they're not going to continue it, and then it's not going to be a habit, and then it's not going to be followed up on. And as far as amplifying as many voices as possible, how to get people involved, I think it's really throw it out there to everybody. Throw it out there. Have a real a live opinion survey, being able to break the silence. That one of our organizations that Michelle and I attend, they talk about always breaking the silence. And I think talking about things that some people are worried about talking about, having the difficult, candid conversations in a safe space where everyone is welcome, and also making it perfectly clear that the white old man is part of diversity. They have to be in the room. I think most people out there don't think that the white old man is not a part of diversity, and to lead with that, and people to just say it from the beginning and say everyone is welcome, because it's they're excluded then, so they have to be in there.
I'd love to jump in and add too that there's an issue of safety as well, right? So because we could say like, hey, everybody come say the hard thing, and then you're like, are you freaking kidding me? Because when I say that hard thing, I'm going to get fired, or there's going to be some sort of like punitive action. And so that's totally the goal. But I also think there's this work to be done culturally leading up to it, and like continuing through it, where we're not asking the people who may be in a marginalized space come tell me what it's like for you to be marginalized here, and then you're gonna like train me on all the things, right? Because if you're a leader and you want to foster belonging, that doesn't feel very, safe always for people. And so we also have to have those kinds of conversations, and that's tricky too. And so I think that's where some of the tools like Raghu was talking about, surveys and things like that, that actually may help to provide some anonymity for people and some cushion so that they can say the hard things, can be really helpful.
So I like to add, and I love, both of those perspectives. And again, here, I think I'm probably showing up more as HR today than I am insurance. I caution leaders and organizations that a lot of the data that we truly need in order to kind of identify, even recognize the makeup of our workplace has to be self-disclosed. And to your point, it has to be something that people feel safe to share. There's certain things during the interview and onboard process that, just from an EEOC standpoint, we're not allowed to ask. I can't ask about sexual preference. I can't ask about marital status, right? These are things that are part of our identities, but these are not necessarily things that are going to show up when I just run a census of my, my payroll and my staff. And so giving people the opportunity to identify, and people are not going to identify unless they feel safe, like there's not going to be any sort of backlash or repercussion. And then also doing things that are that genuinely move not what we think that they need from us, but what they've articulated. And so in the insurance space, we've seen the emergence really in the support of ERGs, these employee resource groups, where you can collectively come together and say, as this demographic, we feel like we lack XYZ. And so I was recently at a meeting, and it really broke my heart because the term that was used for the ERG is someone referred to them as special interest groups. And I said, well, I would like to refocus us on the R of ERG, which is resource. Ideally, in an organization, when leveraged properly, the leadership should be in touch with that ERG to kind of hear what the collective voice is saying. And so it's so important that we understand the importance of representation. And so one of the examples that I give is when it comes to mentorship. So if the selection of mentors, because oftentimes I hear, well, we have mentors and no one's signing up for this, right? But if my potential mentor doesn't share any of the lived experience that I do, if they can't relate to the things or hurdles that I've had to overcome, then they may not be able to meaningfully help me navigate this space that they're very unfamiliar with. So making sure that we have enough of us, and I'll get off my soapbox on mentorship in a moment, but I'm a firm believer that you don't have to have reached any specific status or title in order to raise your hand and agree to be a mentor to someone, because your struggles, the things that you maybe the stories you're not really excited to tell, that may be the catalyst that helps somebody recognize that where I am doesn't have to be where I stay. I can get back on track. And if you were able to move past this, then that's something that's available for me too. I talk a lot, and I think a lot about disproportionate impact. So sometimes organizations put forth like a benefit or there's a change, and because it's being leveraged unilaterally, they assume that it's impacting everyone the same way. Specifically right now, we have this debate about return to office. And so without concern, there's several studies that have shown that people from marginalized communities have actually had an increase in mental well-being while being remote, because they don't have to suffer the microaggressions and the disruptions and all of those things. They can focus on, the work in front of them. There's so much going on right now, the economy, whether it be gas prices, inflation, childcare, a lot of these things disproportionately impact women. And so I love what Raghu was talking about, that, when we look at, they're like, oh, well, we did this for the entire department. Well, how are your actions really, what are they saying? Because if there are business decisions that are being made that seem to disproportionately impact a portion, then do they really feel like they belong? Is my wellness being prioritized? Are my needs being considered? And so it's a really difficult conversation, because in order for us to make meaningful change, we have to be vulnerable and transparent, and there has to be a degree of benchmarking. We have to be open and saying, okay, we recognize that today our leadership does not reflect our workforce, but these are the dead timelines and these are the things we're looking to do, so that we're being held accountable. Because I think that was mentioned earlier, that if you give lip service without doing the work, then it comes across hypocritical. And that's how you really lose that faith of your organization, that your intentions line up with your words when you say a thing and then that thing never transpires. And so then you're like, okay, this was just for the optics. You just wanted me for the new brochure cover. And so we don't want to tokenize, diversity either, where you're just checking a box, but then they get there and they realize that there is no ladies' restroom.
Absolutely. Wow. We're only halfway through. This is already so incredibly impactful. Precious, I want to stay with you for a minute and ask you the following question, right? Like ultimately insurance is about protecting who and what you love, right? And D&I is a part of that. So how, for the folks in the call and beyond, like how can we use the insurance backgrounds to start or continue the work of D&I in your institutions?
Oh, thank you so much for that question. Yeah, I definitely think that that is the common denominator for most of the insurance professionals that I come across, that we have that heart to help. We want to make sure that the individuals that we encounter understand fully the options that they have to prioritize and to protect the things that matter most, and to recognize that those are going to be very different according to, who you're talking to, and even what stage and phase of life or business they may be in. And so one of the things that really drove me to get into insurance personally was the fact that there's certain encounters, especially when there's an unequal distribution of power, where you go into a situation and you don't have that safety to be able to afford that transparency that's necessary. And I equate that to going to the doctor. If I go to the doctor's office, they're going to have to ask me, and I'm going to have to be able to advocate for myself. What's wrong? Where does it hurt? How long has it happened? And those sort of things. But if I've maybe been not so proud of the lifestyle that I've led, then I may be more hesitant to share with the doctor exactly how the origin of some of these things, and they'll never be able to get to that root cause. And so I see, especially in minority communities, where they're sitting across a desk from someone who does not look like them, and they experience a sense of shame, right? Because maybe their financial situation, whatever the case is. And so they're not able to have that candid conversation that allows them to really leverage this service, this product in its maximum capacity. And so when I think about how representation matters, I think about, when you service the community where you live. And so I love that so much, Raghu, that you're able to set up, there in your hometown, and you're able to share with them, hey, this is where I live, work, play, worship, engage, I'm part of this community. Then we can have more candid conversations and say, hey, look, I've been where you are. I know how this looks, and let me show you how this is not just something for the elite to leverage, but just in very small increments, we can put all the cards on the table, and talk. And so I'm a part of multiple organizations that really support being able to, it's going to take all of us in order to reach, these places that our voice resonates, and being able to figure out where you're most effective is really going to help us to, again, to get the word out, so to speak. So I'll close with saying that in addition to all the different hats that I wear, I don't call them hats anymore. I kind of feel like they're like barrettes because there's so many of them now. That I work in catastrophe claims, and so I'm actually currently on a remote, a virtual deployment, assisting the families and businesses down in Florida from this most recent hurricane. And one of the things that's really going to go down in history with Hurricane Ian is this is probably one of the biggest storms where there was um, so many losses that were either underinsured or uninsured. And so from a claims perspective, the claims aren't there because the coverage isn't there. And so there's a multitude of reasons. I won't go down that rabbit hole too much. But the takeaway from that is that oftentimes people don't have what they need because they didn't have that ability to really access that information in a non-judgmental platform and find out how these things could work to their benefit. And so the inclusion piece of it goes beyond just those of us who work within the industry, but has a lot to do as well with the communities, the families, the businesses that we talk to. Do they feel included even in this process? There's so much distrust with insurance, because we're viewed as, big corporate, big dollars, and they don't care about us. But when they recognize that we are part of the they, so to speak, I think that's really one of the obligations that we have in this business, to bring that inclusiveness and that belonging, back to even on the customer level.
I think that was a perfect segue to the next question. For all of you, actually, right? Like it's clear that there's work to be done internally, but we can't ignore the efforts that need to be done externally, right? So what do these efforts that we continue talking about and specifically related to D&I mean for our customers, the communities that we serve, like you were just mentioning, Precious, and the business relationships that we build with vendors, et cetera? Raghu, you
I'll
want to start
yield.
us off?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I'll just quick thoughts when I think about that. When we realize that we have choices everywhere as consumers, as employees, that we vote with our dollars every day. It's not just on election day. And so when we choose to utilize vendors that have taken a stance to support women-owned businesses, veteran-owned businesses, ones that have more background-friendly hiring practices, ones that give back, not necessarily ones that just have the cheapest price tag associated with that. When we're able to, again, infuse those dollars, I think we see that a lot, like during the holiday season, where we'll have like Small Business Sunday or something like that. But every time we engage and choose to do business with your local Allstate agent, with someone who you have a relationship with, then you really kind of encourage, because the reality of it is, whatever we incentivize is what's going to grow. And so if we take dollars away, now I'm not suggesting that we launch some big dramatic like boycott of organizations, but just realize that every time you choose to represent, to work for, to speak for, whatever, whenever you align your brand with another, you're giving them that endorsement and that support. And so that is really how we start to move the needle. Because as you mentioned earlier with DEI&B, we talked about it in the early phases as being a social imperative. We need to do this because it's good for, the spaces we live. Then we shifted and we even talked about it from being a financial thing. We know that there's multiple studies that have confirmed that diverse teams are more innovative, they're more profitable, all those things. But now we really have to say that this is not an ask. This is a tell, and that if you don't get on board and do the things that for multiple reasons are necessary, then we're no longer going to support you, and we're going to shift our support, to places that align better. And I think from the consumer consciousness, people are more aware of alignment now, because we have more visibility via social media and all these other outlets on what's really behind the brand. So it's really being mindful of what goes into this, and making sure that we are supporting them in all the ways that we can.
Yeah, and I'm also thinking now, so thank you, Precious, for your first response, because I'm thinking about the people that you mentioned in Florida, right, who were underinsured or not insured. And what happens when we don't know the power that we have or the options that we have? What happens then, or what doesn't happen, right? Because there's the stimulus and there's the response, and then the space in between is where we have our power and our choice. And so what happens when we're just, like in the survival mode? And that's where I think the insurance industry is so important, right? That we can have these, conversations like we're doing today. But I'm even thinking about, from within the organization, like let's go back to COVID, for example, and the working for, remotely, right? Working from home, as if that was a gift for everybody, because it actually was not a gift for everybody, right? For some of us to be out of a toxic workplace, the physical space was very beneficial. And yet for others, the home then also added other layers of responsibility that I think significantly impacted our ability to work. And then there were employers who thought, oh, but you're home, so log in. You can log in your pajama pants. We won't know, right? Like there was like this expectation that really ramped up like a hustle culture, I think, right? And leads so much to burnout. And I can give a very quick example from outside the insurance industry, because I think, it's important to show that this is happening everywhere. In academia, for example, during COVID, we saw the productivity. So in academia, it's what are you writing? What are you publishing, right? Where are you getting speaking gigs, virtual ones? So, that's how you get tenure. That's how you get advanced to become a full professor. And so what we saw was productivity for people who identify as male escalated. And then other folks who identify as women, for the most part, who have also children at home, their productivity decreased so much. So what does this mean? This means in about 7 years, we're going to see a whole different profile of tenured faculty members. We're going to see a whole different profile of adjunct faculty, which then has a whole lot to do with financial stability. It has to do with benefits. It has to do, with all sorts of like longevity in your career. So, when there aren't questions asked about what does it mean to work from home, or what are your lived experiences like, we're lacking that conversation about belonging. We're lacking that conversation about equity and inclusion.
I agree with both of you. As far as the community internally, I think a lot of companies can do a better job in social situations on just including everyone, instead of just saying, this is what we want to do, and here's the date for this event. Maybe getting a consensus of everybody in the room, and really finding out, even down to the volunteering and giving back to charities and communities. It doesn't have to be a company campaign once a year. I always get back to that, to give back to the community. It could be, well, Precious, what are you involved with in our department? What are you involved? Oh, you got a 5K race this weekend that you're part of. Why are you finding out your story about that? And then our team huddle, which a lot of companies have, these big companies have now. Let's have a team huddle about it. Precious, as long as you're fine with sharing it. Anybody, even if it's 5 extra people from our department that want to go to that this weekend, let's support Precious, because we know it's a local charity. It's something that's near and dear to our heart. And then maybe that will spur more of a movement for that event, even if it has nothing to do with the company. Maybe somebody from your department will join the board of that charity that will help you. That's just one example of doing something. And it's got to always be gradual. Things that are just, once a year, they just happen. And then when COVID happens, that's the first thing that gets cut. But if you're gradual about everything, and I think it will create more of an atmosphere when you do things like that, the leadership will get way more dialogue from people that they least expect, and there'll be more engagement in a company, and it always gets back to being proud to be somewhere. So I'm proud to be in my community. That's why I opened my agency in my community, and I give everything in my community, which is 5 miles radius as far as charity things. And why not? That's what I do. And I've seen it from other people. I saw them do it first, and I'm just all about sharing best practices and taking others and using it.
Absolutely. Thank you all for sharing on that. Dr. Michelle, if you wanted to kind of get us thinking a little bit more about lack of diversity, in leadership specifically, right? There's been many recent studies showing this in insurance, outside of insurance, and on top of a lot of industries, including insurance, experiencing a talent crunch, which I believe we've mentioned throughout this call. Knowing that there's struggles in recruitment and retention and diversity and leadership, closing the racial and gender leadership gap. What is your perspective on laying the groundwork for continued success in each of these areas?
Yes, I love this question. Thank you. I could talk about this all day. But I do want to offer a resource, and I think we're going to add this somewhere, right? Is that true, PJ?
Yes. We'll be sending some resources, correct?
Okay, yeah, great. Because there was this year, now it's been almost a year though, because we're in November, geez, from MIT Sloan Management, and it was about the toxic culture and the way it's driving folks out, right? And so that was this really interesting blending of what we look at as like the financial reasons why and the people reasons why, and why those things really aren't so separate. And what it showed was the top reasons that people were leaving corporations were about disrespectful environments and that they were non-inclusive. But then the list went on, and it was all sorts of other things that I would say, I wrote it down, that it was cutthroat or abusive or unethical. I think all of those things are about this conversation today. And so I think that it's actually maybe more feasible now for us to have these conversations about people-centeredness as opposed to what's the financial reason why. And what Raghu was talking about how events get cut, or initiatives get cut, it's because it's performative. It's because it doesn't have legs, doesn't have roots right there, in the organization. And that's often because the leadership isn't invested in it either, or that there's not this this representation in leadership that mirrors the rest of the community. So it gets back to having those difficult conversations within the community. It gets back to that, like what I said before, the stimulus response piece, like, okay, we have to hire somebody and here's our deadline. And so then we just remove the choice, like, oh, well, we just had to do this quickly. Well, guess what? You made a choice to make this quick hire. You made this choice then to hire somebody who was just like everybody else who's been through. And so we really need to, have those kinds of conversations and say, maybe the expediency of it all isn't the most important piece. Maybe we need to slow the roll a little bit, and we need to analyze what's actually going on here in our organization. But, I'm not going to lie and say that that's an easy thing or that it's a pleasant thing, because sometimes stepping up and having these hard conversations and being the one to bring the attention can really feel very scary. And sometimes there are repercussions for that. I know people, including myself, who've experienced that before. So it's necessary and it's really uncomfortable sometimes, but I don't know what's more uncomfortable, the long-term maintenance of all the things, right? The oppression and white supremacy culture, heteronormativity, all the things I could keep adding on to this big list, or the temporary discomfort of pausing a search and doing it differently over the next 9 or 12 months. So that's kind of, the direction I'd like to go in thinking about it. And it's kind of practical and also feels really impractical for a whole lot of folks.
So if I can add on to that, and I just love that, we're all out here beating this drum, sharing this message, getting this out there. We think about all the unconscious bias that we have. And when it comes to hiring, recruiting, promoting, it is so prevalent. I mean, everything from our applicant tracking systems that have bias embedded in them, whether it be, I've never understood, for example, the purpose in putting an address on a resume. That's always blown my mind, because I know where I live and I know where the job is. So isn't that up to me to decide if I want to make the commute? Like, why would you rule me in or out based on where I live? Things like that. I use the analogy that if you use the same bait and the same rod and reel and go to the same fishing spot, you're going to catch the same thing. And so, there was a major financial institution that made a really terrible misstatement earlier, probably earlier in the year, I believe it was, about that there was lack of Black talent to be found. And I'm like, well, where are you looking for said talent? We have historically Black colleges and universities that are filled with Black talent. Where are your efforts when it comes to engaging folks? We have this conversation ad nauseum at this point about there being this talent vacuum, this talent shortage within insurance. And so, there are some that are the mindset and they're like, we need to make sure that we have more women involved. Well, I know there's a McKinsey report that was, I think, pre-pandemic, maybe 2019, that said as of, the last couple of years, women represent about 55 to 60% of the total workforce within insurance. However, when you get to leadership, that number drastically changes. And then leadership with women of color, that number changes yet again. So there's a phenomena that I've been reading up on and just really fascinated with, called the broken rung. And it talks about that the most friction that women encounter is leaving that entry level position to like that first managerial promotion. From then on out, it seems like it's more acceptable because now they can envision you as a leader because you have leadership experience. But how do you get past that initial, piece? And so as we're thinking about these things and calling a thing and not being afraid to say if we want a different response, we're going to have to approach it differently. I love that Michelle was talking about in academia because I think it's we're really bad about that, right? We'll have like an event and it'll be posted in the lounge for internally or in the cafeteria. And then they're like, where are the people? Like, we told everyone we're going to have a thing, but where are they? And it's like, yeah, but you posted an ad in like 8-point font in the middle of like the financial section. You're not even getting it in front of the people that you're looking to serve or you're looking to bring in. So being very mindful, and that's where it comes to, it can't just be we're all in agreement that this is what we want to do. Where are your practices, your policies, your procedures? Where are the ways that you're going to make sure that this is embedded within the entire process so that there's accountability, so that we don't walk away from this saying, well, we gave it our best shot. Our best shot can't be good enough. Whatever we measure, whatever gets measured gets done. And so if we're very intentional in taking these, look, first of all, are we even proportionately representing our workforce? Does the leadership all look one way? And, that was my personal experience in insurance. I worked in service centers, I worked in call centers, and I looked around and there was tons of diversity. There were people that looked like me. I had that strong sense of belonging. I'm like, hey, this feels like, kind of home away from home. As I continued to pursue just my personal development, and I got into different rooms, I'm looking around like, this no longer looks like where I just came from. What is the disconnect? And so, I've kind of taken up the mantle, made that part of my personal mission, is figuring that out. How do I get more people in the room? Because it actually benefits me to normalize, people who look like me and come from my backgrounds in these spaces. So I think that it's imperative that each of us really do that gut check. And I love that Dr. Michelle called out that it's going to be uncomfortable. Right. And during this process, we're not here to shame. We're not here to, make people, to beat them down about what hasn't been done. But I equate this to, I have a 20-year-old, and when she was in high school, she was struggling with a particular subject in school. And so we hired a tutor for her. But while we were enrolling and trying to figure out the best tutor, we had to disclose, well, what were her recent grades? What is her GPA? How long has this particular subject matter been, difficult for her? Because that's the only way that we're able to measure success, what it was pre and what it is post. Right? People are so afraid to share their pre because it is pretty dismal. But unless we're willing to do so, then we're going to lack that accountability. And so even if it's not internal motivation at this point, we have to start holding leadership to account and businesses to account and make them do the thing that they said that they would do.
Absolutely. A point that all of you have made in different parts of the conversation today is really about, not everybody knows everything. Like, we can't know everything. And the fear of saying the wrong thing or taking that first step and not having it exactly correct leads into this, paralyzing feeling that limits progress. So as we're winding down on time, I really want us to all get a chance to speak to that, because at the core, cultures are ever evolving. right? So with that, our learning journey should be as well. I'm a firm believer in that. We believe in that in IE. So I'm curious from all of your perspectives, how can folks continue educating themselves on the needs of various communities? What are those measurements to accountability that folks can put for themselves internally and beyond?
I would start with go to those various communities with people that feel like they belong in those various communities. Build relationships with people, like obviously first, right? And ask them, what do you have going on this weekend? What did you do this past weekend? Nobody asks those types of questions in corporate America. You just feel like, yeah, well, that's the boundary. If you're friends with somebody, it's just, and you're at somebody's house, you'd be asking that question. So what's wrong with asking that question? It's not during the interview process. You're not HR, so you can ask those types of questions. So you can get that, and you'd be surprised about what people would say. And I think if more people did that, more people would find out that, oh, I didn't realize that we have that in common. I run races too. Let's run together. Let's do this. Let's do that. Alzheimer's. I'm affected by that too. I know people. Whatever it may be, we're not alone in our struggles, our passions, and our opportunities. And I think that's how people can get involved and learn more. Especially like what I love to do is when I don't know anything about something, but they do, and I have an expert in front of me, I love to ask questions and to listen, and that's how I learn. And then I brag about learning about it with somebody else that I know, and then they are geeked out about it more than I am because that's their world, and that's how you just bring people together. It's connecting. That's what it is. Just ever evolving. Just go to their communities with them. That's all I had.
I'll jump in there. I love what you said about, we have to, the more we know, the more we realize what we don't know. And I don't like to make assumptions about things. One of the things that I've stopped, that I started to do rather, is when someone's going through a difficult time, I've just started asking the question, how can I support you right now? Because that answer is going to be different. Sometimes, especially like in the grieving process, some people want to talk about it. Some people don't want to talk about it, whatever the case is. It bothers me when their immediate response is to jump in and tell me how they handled it. I'm not where you are and literally cannot be, right? And so while there may be a time and place to do that, sometimes it's being present and listening. There's so much that's going on, and we know how we would react in that situation. I lovingly say that I enjoy these insurance conferences because I'm surrounded with like-minded people that, they live in this space. Like when I'm at home and I'm talking to my husband about the hard day that I had, I got to give him the whole backstory on underwriting and why this was significant. The punchline's done, right? Like he doesn't get it because that's not his world. And so taking a moment to step out of our own head, our own preferences, how we would want to handle situation, and really and genuinely listening without offense, without being defensive, and saying, wow, okay, all this time I had good intentions. I wanted to be there and I was really wanting to advocate, but what you really wanted in this moment didn't line up with what I thought I should be doing. And to be able to prioritize someone else's, needs over your own. So taking that moment, being present, listening, observing, and giving them. It's kind of like, again, as we come into this holiday season, I think that a heartfelt gift trumps an expensive gift every time. When someone was like, oh, you happen to mention this thing and I found it, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm seen, I'm heard, I belong, I have value. It wasn't, well, I went to the big box store and bought this in bulk, so I'm sorry you're allergic to chocolate, but that's all they had. So being vulnerable, knowing that we're not going to get it right, and not letting perfect be the enemy of good is what I would say.
Yes, thank you for that. Not letting perfect be the enemy of good, and that vulnerability. Because I think when we're listening to somebody else, if we are even in that space, right, of having formed that relationship where we're listening to somebody else, it's also listening to what's going on inside of us. Because when is it that I'm like, I would really like to fix this? Can I just hire somebody to come in and make a plan, and then we'll like eradicate it and it'll all be done and good? And then I don't have to feel uncomfortable. I don't have to feel messy. I don't have to think I'm going to make a mistake and offend somebody. I don't have to deal with my own, right, my own mess. And so I think that's a really big part of the learning process, is learning about me as I'm also learning about others, and noticing, oh, I have this edge where I'm like, I don't know what to say. I don't know how to show up. And if I can't do it right, if I can't do it perfectly, if I can't be the proper ally, if I can't be the whatever, I don't want to do it. But that does harm. That fear, right? That fragility, that does harm. And so I'm learning about myself along the way, I think is really important. And I just wanted to add that.
And finished way stronger, but also equally as strong as y'all started. This has been amazing. I have felt so much privilege to learn from all of you, to listen to all of you. I know everybody on the call. I'm going to speak for all of them and say the same thing. Thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your perspective and all your expertise and knowledge. This is a conversation that I hope we continue having. Like we mentioned earlier, we will be sending the recording, we'll be sending resources that you can continue your learning journey. And thank you for all the people that attended, that will be watching this after the fact. Thank you for supporting IE and all these individuals on this call. And with that, I will close it out and wish you all an amazing rest of your day. And you're getting so much love in the chat, y'all. Look at all the
Thanks,
love.
everyone.
Thanks for
Do
having
well.
us.
Thanks for having
Take
us.
care.
Bye, y'all.